Officer Mark Reynolds eased his cruiser to a halt at the end of his shift, the engine's hum sliding into silence as he rubbed the ache from his shoulders. The clock on the dashboard glowed 11:52 p.m., 10 minutes past the end of a routine patrol that had offered nothing more exciting than an empty liquor store and a stray cat rifling through the trash. He flicked off the radio and cracked the window, letting in the humid summer air, heavy with the scent of asphalt and distant fermenting corn. As he steered onto Vine Street, the glow of a solitary street lamp fell across a luminous pop-up sign, Smoke and Spice BBQ. Parked beneath was a charcoal black food truck, whose stainless steel griddle gleamed like a beacon. A thin wisp of blue-gray smoke curled from its offset smoker, carrying the unmistakable tang of hickory and sweet molasses into the night. Mark's stomach rumbled, a reminder that even the toughest beat cops got hungry. He pulled alongside the service window. Behind the counter stood Chef Andre Dre Thompson, arms crossed against his crisp black apron. His strong forearms, freckled and dusted with paprika, spoke of long hours spent wielding knives and tending fire. A polished dome lamp cast half his face in light, the rest in shadow, revealing a calm intensity in his dark eyes. Dre offered a subtle nod. "Evening, officer," Dre said, voice smooth like low-burned tobacco. "What can I get you?" Mark leaned out the window, eyeing the menu painted in bold, curling script. Pulled pork sandwich, brisket burnt ends, honey chipotle chicken. He cleared his throat. "Pulled pork sandwich," he said, trying for casual. Inside, he wondered what made this truck so popular on a weeknight so late. Probably all hype, he thought. Dre's expression flickered. Was it amusement? As he reached under the counter and carved a generous heap of tender pork from the smoker with a pair of long-tined forks. He piled the meat onto a toasted brioche bun, then ladled a thick dark red glaze infused with hickory smoke and brown sugar. A crisp slaw crowned the stack, garnished with fresh cilantro. He slid the plate across the window ledge. Mark lifted the sandwich, hefting its weight in his hand. The steam curled around his fingers, carrying sweet smoky notes. He scanned Dre's face, searching for a tell. He expected bravado or self-promotion. Instead, Dre simply watched, arms still folded, as though daring Mark to find fault. Mark retreated to his cruiser and flipped open the wrapper. He took a cautious bite. Instantly, his teeth sank through layers of soft, juicy pork into the slightly crisp, charred edges. Sweet heat exploded on his tongue. Molasses, smoked paprika, a hint of cayenne that tickled the back of his throat. The meat was unctuous, yet lean, yielding without effort. He chewed slowly, forcing himself to reconcile the flavors with his low expectations. When he swallowed, Mark straightened in the driver's seat, his brow furrowed. "Not bad," he muttered, the words tasting hollow. He looked back at the truck. Dre was leaning against the counter, arms still crossed, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Mark stepped out, sandwich in hand, and returned to the window. "This is pretty good," he admitted, voice grudging. Dre's grin widened into a full, confident smile. "Pretty good?" Dre echoed, voice warm with challenge. "All right, officer. Come back next Friday. I'll fire up my custom smoker and have something that'll change your mind entirely." He extended a gloved hand. "Deal?" Mark hesitated, then shook it. The smoke from the truck swirled between them as the night deepened. In that handshake, a barrier cracked, preconception giving way to curiosity. And Mark Reynolds knew he would return, determined to taste the proof that would either confirm his skepticism or force him to eat every last word. Mark Reynolds sat in his cruiser for a moment longer than necessary, the pulled pork sandwich resting on his lap as he tried to process the unexpected flavor explosion. The humid night air seeped through the open window, carrying the tangle of hickory smoke, sweet molasses, and a faint kick of cayenne that still tingled his tongue. He swiped at a stray pork fiber on the edge of his badge, half amused at how Dre Thompson had bested his toughest critic, a skeptic police officer. With a decisive grunt, Mark stepped out of the cruiser and approached the food truck again, sandwich in hand. He could hear the faint hiss of the smoker's firebox behind Dre, the coals crackling as they burned low. Dre's back was turned, carefully adjusting a small vent lever to regulate airflow. He slipped on a pair of heat-resistant gloves, black, reinforced leather, and wiped his hands on the edge of his spotless apron, the rich burgundy stain at its pocket a testament to countless trials. Mark cleared his throat and Dre turned, the harsh neon sign above them casting a sharp outline around his silhouette. For a moment, Mark struggled to find the right words, pride contending with humility. "Chef Thompson," he began, voice gruff, "that pulled pork sandwich was one of the best things I've eaten all year." Dre's eyes flickered with satisfaction, but he held his ground, arms folded. "Only one of the best?" he challenged gently. The embers in the smoker flared, briefly illuminating Dre's face and the fine lines around his eyes. "You're a cop," Dre continued. "You've had roadside diners and greasy spoons piled with secret recipes that taste the same as the last. So, let me prove it to you properly." Mark took a bite of the sandwich again, chewing slowly to let the gluey sweetness and piquant smoke register. He wiped his mouth on a napkin and averted his gaze for a moment, an unconscious acknowledgement that he was about to admit more than mere approval. "All right," he said finally, meeting Dre's steady stare. "I'm listening." Dre reached beneath the counter and lifted a laminated poster that read, "Friday Sunrise Smoke Session, 5 a.m. Below it, in neat scrawl, "Ribs, brisket, chicken, full cook under my custom offset smoker. Bring your appetite and an honest critique." He pressed the poster into Mark's hand. "You show up at dawn," Dre said, voice soft but firm, "and I'll fire up the big smoker. If my ribs don't make you rethink everything you know about barbecue, I'll refund every cent you spent tonight." Mark folded the poster, its glossy surface creasing in his grip. A hush settled around them as the smoke curled lazily into the night sky. Finally, he nodded, extending his hand. "It's a deal," he agreed, voice low. Their hands met in a firm clasp, a pact forged in smoke and mutual respect. As Mark walked back to his cruiser, Dre turned to stoke the firebox, tongue darting out as he coaxed the coals back to life. Mark glanced over his shoulder once more, sandwich in hand, knowing that this small food truck was about to become the site of a far more serious test, one that would challenge his skepticism and perhaps change his mind forever. Mark Reynolds rolled his cruiser through the pre-dawn mist of an empty lot behind Vine Street, headlights cutting through the haze to reveal a hulking, custom-built, offset smoker gleaming like obsidian in the half-light. Its firebox stood open, revealing a bed of smoldering oak coals, glowing embers of orange and red. The scent of hickory smoke mingled with the damp earth, a heady aroma that tugged at Mark's curiosity more than his stomach, though his hunger was real after a long night's patrol. Chef Andre Dre Thompson greeted him with a nod, slipping a pair of heavy leather gloves onto his hands. "Morning, officer," he said, voice low but warm. Dew glistened on his apron, and the first rays of sun gilded the smoker's chimney. "Before you taste, you need to learn." He handed Mark a long, slender probe thermometer and guided him to a steel rack loaded with ribs dusted in Dre's signature rub, a blend of paprika dark brown sugar, garlic powder, and a hint of ground ancho chili. "We're at 225 degrees Fahrenheit right now," Dre explained, tapping a dial on the smoker's front. "That's the sweet spot for low and slow. Too hot, and the collagen won't break down properly. Too cool, and the smoke will overpower the meat." Mark watched as Dre loaded the ribs onto the grate, meat glistening with the rub's coarse crystals. "Wood selection matters," Dre continued, tossing a chunk of soaked applewood into the firebox. "Oak gives you a bold backbone. Fruit woods like apple or cherry add sweetness and a delicate fruit note. We use a 3-to-1 ratio, 3 parts oak, 1 part fruit wood, for balance." He closed the firebox, adjusted the intake damper to a narrow slit, and cracked open the smokestack damper a quarter turn. You control the flavor by managing airflow. More oxygen means hotter fire and thinner smoke. Less oxygen gives you thicker smoke and deeper flavor. As the smoker hissed to life, Dre turned to Mark. "Your turn." He handed him a pair of tongs and a rib slab. Mark hesitated, steel gloves pinching his fingers, then flipped the meat with surprising ease, the rack gliding smoothly under the meat's weight. Dre pointed to the edges. "See the crust forming? That's the bark. It traps moisture and flavor. Don't move it too often. Let it set for at least 30 minutes before checking again." Mark nodded, brow furrowed in concentration as he mimicked Dre's motions. Next, Dre demonstrated a spritzing technique, mixing apple juice and apple cider vinegar in a spray bottle. He misted the ribs lightly, explaining, "This keeps the surface moist, so smoke particles stick more readily, and it prevents the meat from drying out during the long cook." Mark handed back the sprayer, taking a moment to absorb every detail: the angle of spray, the distance from the meat, the timing. Finally, Dre pulled out a mid-cooked taste sampler, a small slice of brisket he'd been toasting on the side. Its smoke ring, a vibrant pink halo beneath the dark crust, gleamed under the dawn sky. He offered the bite to Mark, who closed his eyes as the smoky, savory juices flooded his palate. The collagen breakdown was perfect, gelatinous but intact, the flavor layered with sweetness, smoke, and a whisper of heat. Mark exhaled, setting down the sampler. His skepticism had melted like morning frost under the sun's first rays. I had no idea," he admitted, voice hoarse with wonder. Dre's smile was all the confirmation he needed. The real barbecue was more than meat and fire. It was precision, patience, and passion measured in every flick of the damper and every bead of sweat over the smoker's heat. Dre slid back the smoker's heavy steel door, and a wave of fragrant, syrupy smoke poured into the cool dawn air. On the rack inside lay a rack of St. Louis cut pork ribs, their surface studded with a mahogany bark flecked in black pepper, brown sugar crystals, and chili flakes. He grabbed a pair of tongs, lifted the slab, and transferred it to a sheet of butcher paper on a nearby prep table. Mark stood close enough to feel the heat radiating off the meat, the steam curling around his fingers as Dre expertly wrapped the ribs in paper Bibles for their final rest. Then, with a flourish born of confidence, Dre peeled back the paper and used a chef's knife to slice one rib at the bone. He plated it on a small wooden board and handed it to Mark with a steady nod. "Go ahead." Mark lifted the rib to his lips and hesitated. This was no greasy diner fare. The meat gave beneath his teeth with the gentlest pressure, a delicate resistance that yielded instantly to tender juiciness. He closed his eyes, letting the smoky sweetness wash over him. The first sensation was the caramelized crust. Molasses and smoked paprika danced together, a kiss of honeyed heat lingering on his tongue. Next came the pure, clean taste of oak smoke, its dry whisper balancing the rub's sweetness without bitterness. A subtle tang of apple cider vinegar cut through the richness, awakening every corner of his palate. He chewed slowly, savoring the way the meat fibers slid apart like velvet ribbons, releasing collagen-rich juices that coated his mouth with luxurious warmth. Each swallow brought a new layer: the nutty char from the wood fire, a hint of garlic and thyme from the marinade, and finally, a low, lingering whiff of mesquite that teased the back of his throat with soft spice. When he opened his eyes, they were bright with disbelief. The world seemed sharper, the morning light more golden, the scent of hickory smoke more intoxicating. He looked at Dre, struggling to find words. That was incredible." His voice cracked, an edge of awe betraying his excitement. Dre offered him another rib, sliding it across the board. "Welcome to real barbecue," he said, eyes glinting with quiet pride. Mark took the second rib without hesitation, knowing that every preconception he'd harbored had just been dismantled by the simplest, most profound truth. Exceptional barbecue is an art, measured in smoke, heat, and the patience to let time do the work. And in that first bite, Mark's skepticism had vanished like embers in the wind, replaced by genuine, unguarded respect. Mark Reynolds eased into the driver's seat of his cruiser, the dawn light creeping through the windshield as he stared down the last lingering wisps of smoke curling from Smoke and Spice BBQ's chimney. His taste buds still sang from that perfect rib, but he knew better than to stop there. With a decisive tap of the mic, he keyed the radio. "Unit 27 to dispatch, requesting permission to remain on scene. I'm going to try more of the menu." "Copy that, Unit 27, crackled the dispatcher. "Back up en route, ETA 10 minutes. Enjoy the barbecue." He chuckled and hung up, then climbed out of the car. Dre greeted him with a knowing grin and beckoned him back to the smoker. First up, burnt ends. Dre opened the smoker's door again and pulled out a shallow pan of brisket burnt ends. Dark caramelized cubes, each one edged in sticky mahogany bark. He scooped a handful onto a sheet of parchment and handed them to Mark. The moment those cubes touched his tongue, Mark felt his skepticism shatter. The exterior gave way to tender, gelatin-rich meat that burst with smoky sweetness and a whisper of molasses. The glaze, Dre's secret blend of brown sugar, garlic, and a trace of cayenne, clung to each cube, leaving a warm glow that chased away any remaining doubt. Holy, Mark murmured, cheeks flushed with delight. Before he could finish, Dre was already sliding out a skillet sizzling with freshly pressed corn tortillas, golden and speckled. He layered them with succulent pulled brisket, a spoonful of crisp pickled red onions, a drizzle of tangy crema, and a final sprinkle of chopped cilantro. Brisket tacos, Dre declared. Mark sank his teeth into the first taco. The contrast, the soft tortilla, the cool sparkle of onions, the rich, smoky beef, hit him like a revelation. He closed his eyes, savoring the interplay of textures and temperatures. Dre didn't pause. He reached for a row of chicken thighs glazed in maple syrup, spiked with minced jalapeno, and brushed them onto an open grate. As the thighs crackled, the glaze caramelized into a lacquered sheen. Dre handed Mark a thigh on a wooden board. Mark pulled off a piece of skin, crispy, sweet-spicy, and tasted it. The heat of the jalapeno, nestled in the syrupy maple, underscored by a faint hickory smoke, made his tongue tingle with admiration. By the time Mark finished his third taco and last piece of chicken, neighbors and early morning joggers had gathered, drawn by the irresistible aromas. A runner, towel slung over his shoulder, paused and watched Mark digging in. Mark wiped his hands on a napkin, turned to the jogger, and thrust a brisket taco toward him. "Trust me," he said, voice brimming with enthusiasm. "You need this in your life." As the jogger bit down, Mark placed a hand on Dre's shoulder. "Chef Thompson," he said, voice thick with respect, "I doubted you. But what you're doing here? It's art." Dre's smile was quiet satisfaction, proof that exceptional barbecue, like true craftsmanship, wins hearts one delicious bite at a time. Officer Mark Reynolds pulled into the precinct parking lot in full uniform, the crisp lines of his khaki shirt and navy tie stark against the soft glow of the late afternoon sun. His cruiser's engine ticked as it cooled, and he climbed out with a purposeful gait, each boot strike ringing on the asphalt with newly forged resolve. In his hand, he clutched a small, worn notebook, the same one he used for incident reports, now filled instead with page after page of barbecue notes and a single clear reminder: apologize to Drakji. He strode across the lot to Smoke and Spice BBQ's familiar pop-up spot, where the fading daylight glinted off the stainless steel exterior. Dre's offset smoker was silent now, its embers glowing faintly as the chef wiped down his prep station for the evening service. At the counter, Dre looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes when he recognized the uniform. "Officer Reynolds," Dre greeted, voice calm but curious. He set aside a clean towel and folded his arms, the slopes of his apron crisp against his black tee. Mark swallowed, unbuttoning his service badge from his shirt pocket and placing it gently on the counter. "Chef Thompson," he began, voice steady but earnest, "I owe you an apology." He paused, searching Dre's face for a flicker of grace. "Last week I came here thinking I knew good barbecue, and I doubted your skills. I let prejudice and assumption cloud my judgment." Dre's posture softened, but he waited for Mark to continue. Mark nodded to the badge. "This is more than a piece of metal. It's a promise to protect and serve everyone fairly. And I failed to do that when I judged you before tasting your work." He reached out, fingertips brushing the badge. "I'm sorry." A hush fell between them, broken only by the distant hum of the precinct's generators. Dre glanced at the badge, then back at Mark. Finally, his features relaxed into a small, genuine smile. He pushed the badge gently back toward Mark. "I appreciate that," he said quietly. "Your word means something." Mark exhaled, relief mingling with gratitude. He leaned forward. "I'd like to make it up to you, and to the community." Our precinct is hosting a charity fundraiser next month. I want Smoke and Spice to cater it. No cost, of course. You make the food, we'll bring the people. Dre considered the offer, then nodded, the corners of his mouth curving upward. You've got a deal, officer, he replied. He extended a hand and Mark shook it, firm, respectful. As they stood side by side beneath the warm glow of the food truck lights, the air rich with the faint residue of hickory smoke, both knew this moment marked more than an apology. It was the start of a partnership built on genuine respect, proof that breaking bread together could heal divides and bring a community closer, one savory bite at a time. 2 weeks later, the afternoon sun hung low over the precinct parking lot as Smoke and Spice BBQ rolled in for the annual community cook-off fundraiser. Rows of folding tables and bright canopies had sprung up between squad cars and the station's entrance, decorated with red and white checkered tablecloths and strings of multicolored pennants. The savory scent of hickory smoke curled through the warm air, mingling with the tang of barbecue sauce and the sweet promise of cornbread. Deputy Mark Reynolds stood behind a registration table near the front gate, clipboard in hand and a stack of all-you-can-eat wristbands at the ready. He greeted neighbors, families with children clutching balloon animals, local business owners in crisp shirts, and school teachers in sun-faded polos, handing each a wristband and directing them toward Dre's food truck. As the line snaked past the smoker, he could see the excitement in their eyes, matching his own. Behind the counter, Chef Andre Dre Thompson moved with effortless grace. He ladled pulled pork into paper trays, sprinkled burnt ends into small ramekins, and arranged brisket sliders on miniature brioche buns. His offset smoker hissed and glowed behind him, the wood's embers sending curls of fragrant smoke skyward. With each order, Dre offered a warm smile and a quick pointer, try the honey chipotle slaw on top, or don't miss the maple jalapeno chicken, transforming every interaction into a culinary masterclass. Midway through the event, Dre called out to Mark, "Your usual, deputy?" Mark laughed, lifting a sampler platter piled high with mixed meats and sides. He carried it to a nearby picnic table where community leaders and residents mingled, comparing their favorites. As he bit into a smoky rib, its sweet spice glaze releasing a burst of warmth, he caught Dre's eye and gave him a thumbs up. Dre's broad grin was all the confirmation he needed. Across the lot, uniformed officers clowned with paramedics over cornbread muffins, and local kids darted between tables, sticky-fingered and delighted. At the sauce tasting station, Mark joined Dre in judging the judges, 4 volunteers whose faces were smeared with barbecue rub and bright smiles. Together, chef and cop sampled each homemade sauce, offering thoughtful critiques amidst peals of laughter. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the fundraiser closed with a ceremonial ribbon cut. Mayor Martinez stepped forward, wiping a tear of laughter from her eye. "Thanks to Smoke and Spice and Officer Reynolds," she announced, "we've raised enough for new playground equipment and an AED for every patrol car." The crowd erupted in cheers, clapping Dre on the back and shaking Mark's hand. In that glow of community triumph, Dre and Mark stood side by side, smoke drifting at their backs, wristbands wrapped around eager wrists. Proof that, when food is shared and preconceptions set aside, bridges are built stronger than any barrier. And as neighbors and officers alike filed past the smoker one last time, each tray handed over sealed the promise of unity, one perfect smoky bite at a time.